Hi, it's me, the anti-Black Barbie, the all-watchful eye of anti-Blackness. So I'm sure you all are wondering, why am I so late to this story? And honestly, I have just been so swamped with work lately that I just really haven't had the time to really get to my computer. But over the weekend, I actually had the opportunity to end up watching the Laverne Cox accountability panel. If you're not exactly sure who Laverne Cox is, she is a Black trans actress, a screenwriter, an LGBT plus Q advocate. She has many titles and is very well known. I think most of us were introduced to her as Sophia from Orange is the New Black. However, she has been in a variety of different movies and TV shows. And from my knowledge, most people consider her to be the face of the Black trans community. So, if you're not exactly sure kind of what's going on with Laverne Cox, a few weeks ago, she ended up coming online and teasing a story for her podcast. Pretty much what she says is that around the year of 2020, she was in a relationship for about 3.5 years with a white, blonde hair, blue eyed MAGA Republican. And of course, I'm sure you can imagine that it came with a lot of backlash. And to my surprise, Laverne Cox actually agreed to join an accountability panel with other trans women who were not comfortable with some of the messaging that she was sharing. So I'm going to keep it really simple and just more so add what I thought about some of the key points that happened in the video. One of the first things I really appreciated was the fact that they had a cast of majority trans women to be able to hold Laverne Cox accountable, because I feel like as, straight or gay or people who are not necessarily marginalized or as marginalized as trans people, it can be hard for us to contextualize some of these stories and how they're ending up in these situations in the first place. And if you don't really have someone just like hand feeding you this knowledge, it's not readily accessible to the average person about how a Black, trans person is going to have to navigate society. So that's just why I'm really grateful that they decided to go with the majority cast of trans people, because I don't think that anyone really wants to sit here and listen to someone gay or straight hound Laverne over a very unique experience. So I'm going to be bouncing all over the place, but I do kind of want to address what Laverne said specifically before I kind of start going over what the other panel members ended up saying towards her. So the concept of someone of Laverne's status, wealth, and attraction level not being able to find a single Black person who was able to make her feel valued or loved in 48 years, but a white MAGA Republican was able to do that, just doesn't sound realistic to me. And when you contextualize the fact that Laverne openly admits to using dating apps and not really caring about the person's socioeconomical status, it only makes this even harder of a pill to swallow. Because if she came online and told us that because she is a celebrity, she's not comfortable with using dating apps, or she's specifically looking for someone in a certain tax bracket, I think that the story could have been slightly more believable. But like I said, when you find out that the white person she dated was just working a very simple corporate job, it makes it hard to digest what she's saying as authentic. So I'm going to put a pin in Laverne. I'll come back to her a little bit later, but I want to kind of go through the panelists and my opinion of them and what they had to say. So one of the first people I kind of want to discuss is the Dominique Morgan. I actually really enjoyed her. I thought that she had a really good balance of holding Laverne accountable while also not doing too much. I think that if anyone was the most balanced on this panel, she was certainly it. I think that she had a lot of great points, but I think one of my favorite points that she made was that based off of Laverne posting this video, it speaks volumes to the people who are in her general circle. Because I think that anybody who even understands the basics of Black optics, they probably would have told her not to post it. But instead, it seems like she's being encouraged by someone or some people to continue this behavior, and it's not resonating with her general audience. And I actually think that was very spot on, because I think that in a lot of these cases, people who swirl typically like to live in echo chambers. They don't want to be told about themselves. They don't want to be told about their politics. They don't want anybody to hold them accountable for their anti-Black behavior. And again, I can't necessarily speculate one way or the other, but it definitely does seem like that is the case in this scenario. Because, I mean, anybody who's going to come online and say what Laverne did in the way that she did is certainly not someone who is in community with pro-Black or on average Black people. I think that another thing that she did a really great job of highlighting is that a lot of this behavior is generational. It's not to say that we don't have some stragglers here and there in the newer generations, but I think that people like Laverne or RuPaul or Tyler Perry, they came from a generation where this was heavily emphasized. Now, I understand we're kind of in a shit show now, but I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, America really was branding itself on being the melting pot where anybody could come here and date who they want, be who they want, say what they want. And I think that time has really shown that that's not the case, which is kind of why I feel like there's just been such a disconnect with a lot of Black celebrities' audiences because we tried the love is love, you can't help who you fall in love with, and that didn't serve us. They're taking our jobs, they're treating us as second class citizens, they're doing everything they can to remind us that we're less than they are. So I can see why a lot of people, especially the younger generation, are having it anymore. Okay, so the next person I want to talk about is Dashaun. They didn't really say much, but I really appreciated the one or two things that they did end up saying. I really appreciated the fact that they laid the framework for desirability because I think that gets missed quite often in these conversations. I think that before people can go immediately to the standard anti-Black talking points about how no one wants them, they really have to start and contextualize a few things. Are you dark skinned or are you light skinned? Are you plus size or are you skinny? What is your age? How much money do you have? How attractive are you? In this case, are you able to pass for a woman or a man? And it's like when you dissect these things, it becomes very difficult to understand how Laverne Cox, of all people, was not able to find one person in 48 years that was Black who could give her the same treatment that a MACA Republican can. Now, I don't want to push too hard, but I feel like if we understand how colorism and fat phobia and general desirability politics work, it's a very hard story to sell for Laverne to say that she wasn't able to find someone in such a long period of time. Deshaun also did a pretty good job of just highlighting that people really aren't being honest about their dating experiences and what's leading them to these dynamics. And I want to pivot a little bit to something that I noticed. I feel like whenever we have these conversations around desirability, people who are not marginalized tend to be the most offended. And I actually thought it served as great confirmation because the minute Deshaun started talking about desirability politics, that was the minute that Quei just completely lost control. And that's why it can be very challenging trying to have conversations around desirability with people who are conventionally attractive. Because this person, from what I understand, she predominantly likes to top. She is a lighter skinned person and she's not plus size. So it's like, I mean, of course, she would have the most to say and the most disruption when it comes to this conversation, opposed to the other people who probably understand it a little bit better. But I will get into her in a little bit. The next person that I wanted to talk about was Hope Giselle. I think there's so many amazing things about Hope that we got to see in this video alone. I really appreciated how passionate she was. You could tell that this is somebody who deeply cares about Black issues and looked up to Laverne as a real role model. And I think that's what kind of made the whole moment feel a lot more authentic because we got to see in real time how someone felt about what Laverne was doing and how it could or could not have impacted them. And I just think that that was something that should not be overlooked. My only real piece of advice to Hope is to be cautious about holding people accountable that you're not in community with. I think that sometimes when we see these people online or in these movies or shows or talking about these subjects, we form an expectation of them that is not a reflection of who they actually are. And sometimes we set ourselves up for disappointment when we imagine the person that we want them to be. I think that if you were to ask me, Lavarne's friends probably were not surprised by what she said online, but her fans more than likely were. The reason why I say this is because they probably get to see how Laverne acts in her day-to-day life. They see who she dates, and they probably didn't come to a surprise what she said when she said it. But because we get to see such a limited view of who Laverne is, and this just goes for anybody, it can be very easy for them to paint a picture that may not necessarily be as accurate as what you may want it to be. Okay, and here's the thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be holding Laverne or anybody accountable when they contradict behaviors that they said that they are about. What I am saying is I've gotten to a place in my life where I've learned to lower my expectations of people that I don't actually know because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be led with disappointment. And I hate to say it like that, but a lot of people come online and they just put on a show. They want to be the most interesting and best versions of themselves. And I have just learned to come to terms with it at this point. I think that it's fairly obvious at this point to everybody that I don't really care to hide the ugliest parts of my personality. I am going to be 100% authentic to myself every single time, but that doesn't mean that everybody else is going to operate or think the same way. Okay, so I'm gonna go over the host, Olay. I'm not gonna lie to you, she really kind of gave nothing. I appreciate the fact that she facilitated this conversation, so I can at least give her that. But I feel like when you have really unruly guests, like Quei, the girl in the red shirt, there has to be some level of moderation. And I'm like, you just kind of making faces or saying that you love everybody, that doesn't really do anything for anybody. I think that the conversation could have been a lot more productive. And thankfully, the people on the panel were strong enough to be able to handle someone as ignorant as that. But I just felt like it just kept going in two different directions. And I mean, I will say that she kind of held Laverne accountable a little bit, but in general, like I said, she kind of gave nothing. And I do wish that there was a little bit more that would have been said on her end. Okay, so we're gonna move on to Miss Cat. I actually really appreciated her. I'm not gonna sit here and say she gave much, but I think that she did make some really good points about how a lot of conservative men do chase after trans women, and that wasn't something that I really knew. And it was a very informative piece of information that I actually really do find believable, because if we understand that racists are attracted to black people and a lot of the racists do date black people, then I mean, it's not that far-fetched that somebody who also hates trans people more than likely would end up in bed with them. I also appreciated her just sharing her dating experiences. She's somebody who dates all types of races. I will say, I personally think that a lot of her issues are stemming from the fact that she lives in California. And I just, again, want to reiterate how much your location can impact how you view black dating or other black people. I just am not ever going to suggest anyone black stay in California, bring their kids to California. I mean, same thing goes for Texas, a little bit of New York. There's just a lot of places that you want to avoid trying to build black relationships or black families. And I think that this is going to be the result if you try to put them in places where they're not going to be able to actually thrive. All right, and of course we have to talk about Laverne. When I tell you I was actually very impressed by Laverne by the end of this video, I think that she took a lot of heat. And the fact that she was willing to show up for, several hours to have the conversation with her audience because she understood that they were offended really speaks volumes to, I think, Laverne's character. Because had she not did this, I probably would have just assumed that, she is just a white man's whore. But it seems like in the conversation that she was genuinely lacking awareness. And I think that someone really needed to call her to the mat in order for her to have a better understanding of really what she needed to do and what's really going on in society. So, I really, really adore her for that. And I'm definitely a fan now. I also think if we have to contextualize a little bit about Laverne's situation, it's just a certain level of tone deafness that's occurring and obliviousness. And I think that now that she's a little bit more aware, I don't see it happening again. I feel like when she dated her MAGA Republican in 2020, it obviously had way less implications than it does now. But because of the fact that she said it in this political environment, it was a lot more charged than when she would have just said it like a few years ago. Because now we have just clear-cut proof that these people hate trans people and that they hate black people. So it's like there's far less room for her to wiggle. But I think in that moment in time, I'm not sitting here saying I understand it, because I mean, MAGA has always hated trans people, as they kind of say in the video. But I think that I can see why she didn't take it as seriously as she is now. All right, and we have to leave the best for last, Miss Quei. When I tell you this girl is a hot mess, I mean, if I had to rank her performance in this, I'd have to really give it like a 2 out of 10. Outside of just the clip farming and just being really obnoxious for views, which I'm sure it really did bring in views, I don't think she added anything to the conversation. I think the majority of the time she was cutting people off. She didn't have any real valid points to make. I think that her attitude was kind of stank. Like, I'm like, girl, I genuinely wonder who invited her, and I would have to have a word with them once I figure that out, because it just didn't make sense to me. And kind of like I was saying, the fact that the host just allowed it to continue for so long, it's like everybody was keeping up but her. She was the only one confused. And it's like, I mean, if you don't understand what's happening, just say that. But just being condescending or like trying to gaslight very clear-cut talking points just really rubbed me the wrong way. So I pray that they never bring her back. I think that she's really, really trash. And I'm sorry to everybody who had to deal with her. So that being said, if you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the next one.